destruction, but also a host of other problems. Soldiers immersed in a combat environment face challenges not only in the area of physical survival, but also in the area of ethical and social issues. A man with a weapon in his hands often faces temptations and contradictions, including the desire for tenderness and intimacy. However, when this desire goes beyond what is acceptable, and the soldier, refusing discipline, gives in to the impulse to torture local women, it is a crime. Such behavior is often concealed by soldiers not only from their commanders, but also from their own families, including their waiting wives and friends at home. The problem of sexual relations in the ranks of the Wehrmacht during the Great Patriotic War was so significant that the Reich government had to officially intervene, introducing regulation of this aspect. During the campaign in the USSR, special brothels were set up at each unit, involving both German girls who followed soldiers from Germany and local women who were strictly vetted to ensure that they met the established standards. It is important to realize that the Führer issued such orders not because of his concern for the safety of girls in the occupied territories, but, on the contrary, because of his desire to avoid interaction between Aryans and members of inferior races. Despite government funding, the conditions of service in the soldiers' brothels remained appalling. Many women, of course, could not endure such conditions and either quickly stopped working in the brothels due to unexpected pregnancies or fell victim to venereal diseases. Over time, the Nazis began to involve almost everyone in the brothels. Some women were sent there forcibly, others of their own free will. After all, occupation is always accompanied by hunger and poverty, and in conditions when men were at the front, women had to struggle for survival on their own. There are cases when they worked for food, for a loaf of bread or a sack of flour. Some went directly to the soldiers' canteens, offering their services in exchange for food. Later, special pleasure rooms were even set up in the occupied territories, where soldiers and officers were free to torture women from the local population. According to the military regulations of the time, German soldiers were strictly forbidden to commit crimes against local women. However, not because of concern for the local population, but because of the need to discipline the troops and prevent disease outbreaks. Thus, despite orders from Berlin, soldiers far from Germany often ignored the restrictions, going unpunished for their crimes. Women to work in brothels were most often sought in villages plagued by severe famine. As I mentioned earlier, some were willing to do desperate things for food. However, the situation was particularly tragic for Soviet women who were taken prisoner by German soldiers. Saboteurs, orderlies. Their fate in captivity was often much worse than that of the men of the Red Army. There are many cases when fascists, using captured women, organized real hellish tortures, throwing them into overcrowded barracks where soldiers shamelessly abused them. There are also known cases when German soldiers hid from their families new relationships they had in Russia. I will tell you the story of soldier Wilhelm Dietz as an example. The young, non-commissioned officer Wilhelm Dietz did not particularly want to participate in the war. As time went on, it became obvious that the anti-Hitler coalition was not going to surrender and was resisting the invaders, despite Hitler's promises of a quick victory. After Wilhelm was transferred to the Eastern Front from France, he received 2 contusions and was wounded at Stalingrad. In 1943, he was transferred to a field hospital near the Soviet village of Smely, occupied by German troops in 1941. With food in short supply at the hospital, Wilhelm and other German soldiers often went to the cabbage field to find food to sustain their own strength. In addition to them, local villagers frequented the field. Here, in this fateful field, the German met a woman named Theodosia Ostrich. Soon, Wilhelm and Theodosia began dating. The woman had no close relatives who had participated in the war, unlike other villagers. She was seriously afraid that some of the locals might have taken revenge on her for her relationship with the German non-commissioned officer. One night, she took her lover to the house she had just bought, and there he stayed, determined not to return to his unit again. On March 7, 1944, notice came in Germany that Wilhelm Dietz had been killed. In fact, he remained alive and well. Wilhelm learned Russian, and to avoid accidentally revealing his identity, Theodosia began to call him Vasily. Together, they made up a legend about his origins. After the war ended, they built a new house and had children. Vasily spent most of his life hiding from others in an attic he had built himself. He hardly ever met other people, occasionally going outside, and even when working in the vegetable garden, he tried to limit his socializing so as not to arouse suspicion. After Theodosia's death, Wilhelm had nothing to hide and told the truth about himself to his son. In 1988, after 50 years of secrecy, Wilhelm Dietz decided to surrender to the Soviet authorities and presented himself at the police reception desk. Despite the expected fear of arrest, trial, and execution, he was not tried. He was helped to find relatives in Germany. There he found his sister Catherine, cousins Walter and Wilhelm alive. They, in turn, already had their own children and grandchildren. After that, Wilhelm traveled to Germany. The German government gave him a pension of 190 marks, as well as an allowance of 600 marks after he obtained citizenship. This story is reminiscent of a German soldier who gave up the war for the love of a simple girl. Opinions may vary about Wilhelm, but perhaps 50 years spent in fear in an attic was punishment enough for him, and love helped him survive all those long years. Many German soldiers who returned home after the war had children left behind all over Europe that they never told their wives about. According to historical estimates, more than 800,000 children were born to German soldiers during the 4-year occupation of Europe by Hitler's army. Of these, nearly 200,000 children were born in France. They were objects of ridicule in schools, not realizing what they had done wrong. Many mothers endured the public execution as they were paraded through the streets, cut and naked, after the Germans retreated. And now, 80 years later, some of these grown children are beginning to speak up, overcoming the shame that has held them back all this time. Moreover, many of them are still trying to track down their German relatives. In Norway, more than 12,000 children were born to soldiers and officers of the Wehrmacht during the 5 years of war.